If you've ever read the novel Jane Eyre, you'll probably recognise the figure in this image as Mr. Edward Fairfax Rochester, the mysterious and fiery-tempered man at the centre of the novel who becomes the object of Jane's affections. Paula Rego, the woman who made this image, thought him just a dummy. He appears here fairly brutish, with this fantastic smirk on his face. In this image we stand probably not far from where Jane was when she first saw Mr. Rochester, just moments before his horse slips on the ice and she has to help him recover. In the background we see not Thornfield Manor, the grand Gothic house in which he's in charge, but Paula Rego's childhood home in Portugal, where she grew up under the dictatorship of Salazar. And so these two men, symbols of macho authority, machismo, have been brought together. Rego found in Charlotte Bronte's novel all of the elements that she liked to explore in her art. The storytelling, the figure of the independent woman up against the patriarchy. She found elements of her childhood reflected there. In total, she made some 25 prints illustrating Jane Eyre. And today, 20 years on, after they were first unveiled, they're on display here at the Goldmark Gallery. Intense emotion infused all that Paula Rego did. Her work has this feeling of the imagination manifesting in reality. Feelings like anger, hope, despair, spite, sexual ecstasy, all of these she was somehow able to contain, to bottle up and convey in sly glances, in limbs tugging at their clothes, in clenched teeth and fists, in the theatre of life. Sometimes these feelings were her own, sometimes they were her subjects. But whatever the image, whatever the medium, she was a master of that dark and prickly space where the innermost psychology of the mind bursts onto the bruising, cold reality of the outside world. This ability to cast introspection into powerful expression made her a wonderful storyteller. And the story of Jane Eyre, Charlotte Bronte's novel, revolutionary coming-of-age tale published in 1847, was the perfect foil for her art. The lithographs we're going to see today, illustrating Jane Eyre, all come directly from the archive of Stanley Jones, the master printmaker at the Cohen studio who printed them for Paula Rego. In fact, they include an extra print on an unfinished stone which appears to have cracked and split during the process, possibly a unique print. I say illustrations, but true to Paula Rego's style, these images were emphatically transformed by her reading of the text. In Charlotte Bronte's novel, we see the blossoming of our protagonist, Jane Eyre, from childhood to a quietly independent and individual woman of resilient character in a world that is keen to cut young women down to size. In Paula Rego's prints, we'll see Jane quite literally grow from the elfish orphan schoolgirl tormented by Mrs. Scatcherd and the horrible Mr. Brocklehurst, escaping in her private reading, as in this image, devouring the work of Bewick's birds, into the mature governess who becomes the object of Mr. Rochester's affections. Paula Rego is probably best known for her exceptional draftsmanship, and lithography gave her the perfect medium for exploring that in great depth. She is a master manipulator of scale, of distortions, of size, of shape. In this scene at Lowood School, the fantastically sinister and lugubrious Mr. Brocklehurst looms over this pupil here, almost 3 times her size. There's often a slightly strange, surreal, otherworldly feel to Rego's work, where, for example, has this odd wasp-like figure looking in what looks like a mirror come from? And why is its reflection this strange skeletal visage? The other element that you see to Rego's work is this sort of slightly theatrical scene set kind of composition. And a lot of that was down to the way that she operated her studio, packed to the gills with rag-stuffed dolls, with toys, with stuffed animals, which she could rearrange into figural compositions and then draw from life. It gave even the most strange, surreal, otherworldly images a kind of objective reality, like this image of the scarecrow here. Made a couple of years later, this print isn't actually part of the original Jane Eyre series, but it shows how, for Rego, stories, whether they were fairy tales, whether they were childhood memories, whether they were renowned novels like Charlotte Bronte's, would stick with her, that the images would stay in her mind, they would play over and over again, and they would find new expression. In this strange crucifix-like scarecrow composition, with this decapitated pig's head in the foreground, this scarab beetle, the little skeletal marionette, we've moved a long way from Charlotte Bronte's novel. But as this and the rest of the Jane Eyre series shows, whenever Paula Rego was straying into the world of macabre, surreal dreams, of imaginings, of thoughts finding visual expression, it was always underpinned by hard reality. Rego's Jane Eyre project began in the early 2000s after a chance reacquaintance with Stanley Jones on the streets of London. They'd been contemporaries at the Slade in the 1950s. Rego's previous attempts at lithography had proved dissatisfactory, but Stanley Jones said, "Come along to Kerwin Studios in Cambridge and I'm sure we can get something done." Several of the images were drawn on stone plates directly in Stanley Jones' studio. Others were drawn on transfer sheets, which Paula Rego could take back to her own workshop. Here she could also draw from life, and she made good use of her favourite model, Lila, who had once been the carer for her husband, Victor Willing, who died in the late 1980s from multiple sclerosis. After she'd helped nurse Victor in those last years, she became Paula Rego's most trusted muse. We actually have one of those original transfer sheets here in the exhibition. We see Lila modelling for Bertha, the famous madwoman in the attic in the Jane Eyre novel. Paula Rego had actually come to Jane Eyre from a slightly oblique angle. She first read Jean Rhys's 1966 novel Wide Sargasso Sea, which is a kind of imagined prequel to the Jane Eyre story. It tells the story not from Jane's perspective, but from Antoinette Cosway, the Creole heiress for a sugar plantation in Jamaica. Antoinette is to be married to Mr. Rochester, who hopes to make a lot of money off the family estate. But the abolition of slavery has left it in ruins, and so, becoming cold towards his wife, he renames her Bertha, takes her home to his manor at Thornfield, and confines her in the attic, declaring her to be mad. Reading Jean Rhys's novel before Jane Eyre cemented in Paula Rego's mind the idea that Bertha and Jane were two sides of the same coin, or perhaps two diverging branches from the same path. This image of Bertha sat on the floor, dumb, almost like an outgrown child, is of womanhood stunted by the insidious control that Jane Eyre manages to navigate and eventually reject. But because Lila modelled for both Bertha and for Jane, the two become physically very similar. The pair are suffused with that special quality that you find in so much of Rego's work, of inside and outside, of hardiness and distress, of contrasts meeting in astonishing ways. There are actually very few images in the suite that deal with the last portion of Charlotte Bronte's novel, when Jane has actually rejected Mr. Rochester, discovering that he's still married to Bertha, when she leaves and is resigned to her fate to be married to the missionary St. John Rivers, a life of dull and pious following her new husband. But one night, as the candle is snuffed out and the room is full of moonlight, she hears, somehow telepathically through the air, the call of Rochester. In this image, we see Jane agonising over the decision whether to leave the relative security of St. John's house and return to the man who she has such conflicted feelings for. This fantastic, rich, red background is a kind of warning for the fire that has actually burned down Thornfield House, started by Bertha herself. The Rochester Jane will return to is an old man, blinded by the accident, needing to be nursed, much as Paula Rego's husband was in his later years. Paula Rego used to say that she was always on the hunt for stories, whether it was novels like this, whether it was fairy tales, whether it was excerpts from her own life, from the life of other women that she knew. She found a way of fusing imagination and reality in strange, profound, affecting ways. This must be one of the largest gatherings of Rego's graphic work in a public or private gallery for a very long time. It's a fantastic opportunity to see her work up close, to see her command of the medium, but most importantly of all, to see how, as a master storyteller, she could take a novel as universal, as ubiquitous, as well known as Jane Eyre, and find something new to say in it. I hope you can come and enjoy this exhibition. It'll be on show here for the next few weeks. Anybody who wants to see the work can also head to our website. Please do get in touch if you're interested in any of the images. The sale of every print will be accompanied with a copy of this fantastic book, which includes excerpts from Bronte's text alongside the images, and a fantastic essay by Marina Warner. I hope you've enjoyed this exhibition walkthrough, but I hope even more to see some of you here in person at the show.